All right, good afternoon, everyone. So we're here to talk about, weekly training. I like this one because, let's be honest, everyone likes talking about annuities, but when it boils down to it, well, how do you overcome some of those objections that are constantly in our face? So, the idea for today really is how do we cover probably some of the hardest objections that people are coming at us with, and this guide really is to give a almost a proven response framework. So how do you rebuttal, but in a polite manner from the conversation to ultimately get the client to see the perspective in the way that you want it or the way that they want it. And so what we're going to look at are three main objections that come across. First one, how many times have you heard someone say the fees are too high? Or, I'm never going to do annuities because there's so many fees in that. So we have to figure out how to reframe that cost conversation to the value of what they're looking for. Um, Objection number two. Well, why would I put my money into an annuity when I could just put it in the market and the market will outperform the fixed index annuity? So we got to look at risk tolerances, guaranteed income, and market volatility. So how do you once again rebuttal those conversations in a polite manner, of course? And then what happens if my account doesn't make any money? How many times have you had someone in an FIA where they haven't made any money or think they're not going to make any money when a couple simple fixes could reposition that conversation? So, and lastly, we'll have some bonus conversation flow tips to help you kind of have natural responses to the client. Because again, always when you think about this, it's about due diligence, I'll put it that way, making sure the client understands what they're getting into so you don't have a conflict on the back end. So when we look at the approach here, again, just kind of using my expertise of over 19 years of doing this, we want to mostly acknowledge the concern, without being defensive. Some people will get really defensive when someone doesn't quote unquote see it their way. Reframe around the client's objectives, and then use some simple comparisons and maybe even provide a conversational redirect to get them back on track. So when we start first talking about the fees are too high, how often have you seen or had someone say that the fees are too high inside of these type of plans? What they're usually comparing to is one of three things. So we think of like a CD account. CDs really don't have fees. Money markets, they do have some fees to them, but it's extremely minuscule, but so is the rate of return. Direct market investments. So we'll think about and consider direct market investments. So I hear oftentimes like Vanguard. I would go into Vanguard because of the low fees, or information that they're reading online about variable annuities, because again, all annuities are apparently the same. Variable annuities do have higher fees because you are in sub-account performances. So you need to first figure out and clarify with the client, what they're truly comparing against so that you can come across, your conversation as sincere instead of confrontational. So first, we want to acknowledge and clarify. That's the first step. I appreciate you bringing that up. Fees obviously matter, and you should understand exactly what you're paying for. So once again, going back to what are you actually clarifying this against or comparing this against? Are you thinking about keeping your money in the market, or are you comparing it to CDs or a savings account where they have very relatively low fees? In doing so, you're not being defensive. What you're doing is you're asking questions. And what you'll notice with all of this is there's a lot of questions that you ask the client. What I've always said is so important in regards to sales is you ask the right questions to get to the right answer. And if you're having the conversation around what you feel is right for them, you ask the right questions to have them come up with your answer. And you'll see how in a minute here. So we want to talk about the value. So we want to reframe it around the value. Um, what's important to understand with fixed index annuities, there are no annual management fees. That's a big deal. So financial advisors usually have 1 to 1.5%. Mutual funds have their expense ratios, and depending on what you're investing with the financial advisor, sometimes there's load fees with those. There's also, wrap fees or back end sales charges too. So the insurance company is compensated once upfront, by the carrier, not taking money out of the account every year. So that is, when you think about the commission standpoint, that's how we make our money. The client doesn't pay for it, the insurance company pays for it. So it is a big difference in regards to, how the compensation structure is set up. And so why does this work when you reframe the value? You're comparing apples to apples. So if they have 150, if they have 500,000 in managed accounts paying 1.5% annually, that's 7,500 per year in expenses. Whether the market does well or not, and even over 10 years, you're looking at $75,000 in fees. Whereas with the accumulation annuities, we have products that have no fees at all.
Wow.
So when you think about that, it's a big difference between where they're at and ultimately where you want to kind of frame the conversation. So right off the bat, just understanding the fee structures that they have if they go into a managed account is huge. And this is typical for any financial advisor. You'll see it's around 75 basis points to about 1.5%, depending on how much assets you have under management. They usually reduce it the higher the volume to stay competitive, but 1 to 1.5% is not uncommon. So next step is we really want to focus on what they're actually buying. So when you think about it, what are you really paying for with the fixed index annuity is three things. The biggest one, which a lot of people seem to forget, is principal protection. So the idea of market loss in this scenario, you don't have to worry about because you are protected. There is downside protection against the loss on your account. Growth potential. So you are going to participate in market gains, depending on a cap or participation rate, but there is no downside risk. You're never going to go backwards. And some have that guaranteed income option. So if you have clients 50 to 75, maybe even 80, you can offer those income riders to help them never outlive their money, which is a great conversation, pending once again on the age of the client. So the real question here is, if the real question isn't are there fees, it's, does the protection and guarantee justify, whatever costs you may think of compared to a full market risk or 4 to 5% CD. So once again, you go back to figuring out exactly what they're comparing it to, and then ultimately reposition that conversation. And then lastly, here, you want to redirect the convo. So let me ask you this. If you can protect your principal, participate in market upside, and guarantee you'd never run out of income in retirement, even if you live to 100, would that be worth more than you trying to beat the market and risking a 2008 style type of loss? Because again, a lot of people don't think about that. Last decade or so, we've had a pretty good run. The last couple of years have been a little rocky, but going from 2010 on, there's been an unprecedented bull run for the most part. So when you think of how this works, once again, we're shifting the cost conversation to value. And so it's going back to their priorities. Do you want a higher risk for a potential higher return? What happens if that higher risk impacts you at the wrong time? And now you're set with nothing to protect you on the other side. So fees, being too high is probably a big one. Before I move on to the market, the objection of the market outperforming a FIA, does anyone have any questions on this? Okay. You guys are so stunned, I can tell.
Bill, when you're talking
Interesting.
about managed accounts, you referring to like 401ks and stocks?
talking about a financial advisor managing an account. So
Oh, okay.
if you came to me to manage an account, I would charge you a fee to manage your assets. Now, if you did it by yourself, yeah, you're going to save money, but are you fiscally savvy enough to figure out which ones to put your money into? Do you have the time to make consistent changes? Or are you just saying that because you want to be cheap and figure out, oh, I'll just put my money in this one account and it'll beat whatever you're going to do. So that'll lead into our next question of the market will outperform the FIA. But yeah, most people, if they have an asset manager like a financial advisor, they charge about 1 to 1.5% per year, over the course of the year. So, so yeah, you talk
Okay.
401ks, 401ks, there are fees in that too. There's about a 1 to 2% fee in that every single year as well for the 401k. You're going to be charged for your performance on your accounts. So as your accounts perform, there's an expense fee built inside of those too. So yeah, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Um, so it's understanding your competition, understanding what you're selling against to help you sell better. So there are fees with pretty much every type of investment, except when you talk about the fixed index annuities, when you're not doing the multiplier or rate enhancer, there's no fees to that either. So the big thing is that you have that value proposition there of really an accumulation side, no fees. If
Okay.
you talk about the income side, there is a fee. It's about the same as a 1 to 1.5%, which is what financial advisors do, but you're getting guaranteed income, and the financial advisor can't promise you guaranteed income. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Yep. So let's kind of dive into someone's telling you that the market will easily outperform the FIA. So when you think about this, the objection comes because a lot of people have a short-term memory, right? All they experience is the last, 20 years or so or 10 years where we've had strong markets. They don't fully understand the full-blown sequence of returns in regards to risk. Are you comparing a 30-year historical market, returns to a 5 to 10 year fixed index annuity? So what we have to do is acknowledge that yes, the market can outperform, but at what risk and at what stage of life? So that's the conversation really that we have to position with the client on that standpoint. So you can agree with them, and that's step one. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Maybe over a 30-year period, the stock market has historically averaged around 10%. And if you're 33 years or 35 years old with decades until retirement, being 100% of the market makes sense. However, when you think of how this works, what you're really doing is you're not arguing with them. You're showing that you understand how the market works, how the history of the market is, and ultimately, from that standpoint, they should be able to, um, see that you're not just trying to push something down their throat. But then you talk about things like the retirement risk reality. So here's what you can consider, in regards to changes within 10 years of retirement, or you're already retired, can you really afford a major market correction? So when you think about someone who's in that 50 to 70 range, thinking about retirement, let's say they do retire with $500,000 and they're pulling out 30,000 a year. Let's say the market's doing 10% return. Well, the market drops 30% in 1 year. So now you're at $350,000 plus you're pulling out $30,000 per year. So you're left with 320,000. Now you're not getting that compound growth like you would on 500K. It's now compound growth on 320K. So when you think about the sequence of returns, now you have less money growing for you, and now you're limiting the scope on what you can actually pull out long term. So when you think of it that way, you've made the risk tangible with real numbers. Now all of a sudden that they're seeing that from that perspective, maybe a portion of it going into a fixed index annuity makes sense for retirement purposes. Now, once again, that is the example from a retirement risk standpoint in the fixed index side with income. Now, if you think of it from the accumulation side, are you supposed to put all your money into something risky all the time? No. Why? Because eventually you do get older, but you want to balance out your portfolio. So if you are that 35-year-old, maybe 40-year-old, putting a fraction or a portion of your assets into a fixed index annuity that's designed for accumulation will give you that protection, that foundation of a conservative approach with, say, you're investing money into a 401k and you can be more aggressive with that. This will be your conservative side. You can be more aggressive with the 401k. So there's a couple ways to position that. Number three, you position the FIA as safe money. So kind of what I was just saying, that's why most retirement planners recommend splitting your assets. So when you think about it, you don't want your money to all be in the same spot for that same designated time frame. So if we can diversify the approach, now your money is working smarter and not harder. Sometimes you're going to have years where it'll be worse because of, returns in the regular market, and you'll still do okay in this fixed index annuity. So they balance each other out and mitigate your risk. And then redirecting the convo, so the real question isn't will the market outperform? It's really how much of your retirement money can you afford to risk? So if you did lose 40% in a market crash next year, would that change your plans? And the answer is 100% yes. So it's reframing that conversation before to ultimately see from the standpoint of what you're looking at. This market is great, but we've seen incredible volatility recently. Like I think the VIX closed today at like over 11%. And so the VIX is the indicator for volatility in the market, and the market was down today. So, you're going to see a lot of wide swings from the market standpoint. Some people could post something on Twitter. I'm still calling it Twitter. I can't call it X on Twitter, and all of a sudden the market reacts to that. You just never know what it's going to do based on some people's phrases and assumptions. So, is it really advantageous for someone to put all of their money in the market? No. That's where we come into play. Any questions on this? Okay. So, what happens in my account if my account doesn't make any money? Because we're supposed to show that 0% column, and then everyone freaks out about that. So, what this objection reveals, really, from the client standpoint, is a financial misunderstanding of how FIAs work. Prospects think if the index doesn't grow, they lose money or get nothing. They're gambling on market performance with no safety net. So, what we're looking at here is how do we once again shift that conversation? So, first and foremost, we have to address the fear directly. When we think about what we're talking about, it's one of the best features of the fixed index annuity. You're not going to lose any money, even if the index does zero for the entire 10 years. And when I look at an illustration, that's the first thing I look at is the 0% column. Because some of the times when you have these certain annuities, accumulation annuities, even the 0% column has a market value adjustment that by after 10 years you made like 10 grand, 15 grand. So even with no returns, you're still getting something. So the big thing though is always is your principal is protected. Once again, the encouragement from our side, when I say your principal is protected, we're not investing in those risky what are they, multipliers or percentage boosters or things like that, because 9 times out of 10, I've never really seen them work. So when you think about that, you have your true principal protection when you do, say, the S&P 500 by itself, or the NASDAQ, or, if you do like volatility controlled indexes and they're not in the ones with the enhancer, then you're not going to lose any money. And that's the biggest thing. And if you have that income rider, your money will grow. So when you think about it, even if the market doesn't turn anything and you have the income annuity, you're going to see a growth strategy with that. And a lot of people just don't realize that. So if we look at practice here and we give them a real life illustration, so 6% income rider. Okay, so the client's 50 years old. Market's flat, next year, but your base grows by that 6%. So you're actually growing your money continually with the base with that income rider. So even if the market returns zero, you're going to get a benefit base that will continue to grow. So we fast forward, eventually the benefit base will continue to grow. We're almost at 300,000. And even if the market doesn't perform, you're still winning. So the idea with these income annuities is you're going to have an opportunity. Let's say it goes up to 418,000 at a 5% payout rate. You're pulling out 20,900 a year in income guaranteed for the rest of your life. So once again, you just have to show them the true value of what they are, looking for, but really address that fear up front. On the flip side, if you have someone who is looking at more the accumulation side, what I would say is that you want to position it with an appropriate index strategy. So if you're going to do the S&P 500, the S&P 500 historically has done 8 to 10% over the last 30 years. So if we look at this traction, do you really think that your annuity is not going to get some type of return over the next 10 years? Well, even the Great Depression only lasted 3 years. So is it fair to say that you will make some money? Therein lies the rub. So number three, compare to market risk. Once again, thinking about how the market will drop. Once again, going back to sequence of returns. So if you have 250,000 in the market with no protection and it drops 20%, you're down to 200K. So I'll give you a good example. This is legit what happened to me at AIG. There was a dramatic drop in January of 2022 and I lost my 401k became a 201k. It built back up, but not completely up to that number, and I ended up walking away with 200,000. And I thought to myself, geez, this is ridiculous because now I just lost 20% of my account and I did nothing, to warrant that. So when you think about that, can we talk about an opportunity where you won't have to worry about that market fluctuation? So if you're talking about that income dropping, there's no guarantee you won't run out of money. That's one of the biggest concerns. I think 60% of people are more afraid of outliving their money than they are dying. So when we talk about that, this gives you that protection of the floor so you can't lose your principal once again. And then you want to redirect the convo, as we've mentioned before. So let me ask you this. Do you find value in knowing your money is more protected and reduces risk of exposure? Or would you rather try to time the market and hoping you don't retire right before a crash? Because once again, when you think about how that works, it all depends on timing in the market. Anytime someone has tried to time the market, they lose. Most people pull out of the market due to fear, and it's usually at the worst time. So if your market is running low, most savvy investors would be like, that's the time to pump money in. Where most people are afraid at the time it gets low because they lost a ton of money, they want to stop the bleeding. So they pull the money out when that's the time you should be putting it in. And then it rises up here, and then they're like, oh, time to put money into that because it's going up. So people often do it in the inverse way. So we have to kind of put in the forefront of their minds when it comes to exposure. When do you want exposure? For how long do you want that exposure? And do you think you're going to beat the market or time the market appropriately? No one's watching it religiously. So those are three of the major objections we think about with fixed index annuities. But what I would say too, from the standpoint of some conversational flow tips, don't debate people. The worst thing ever. Do you ever think you're going to win an argument by debating with them? everyone's gonna come back just more pissed off. Just try having a conversation about Michael about whole life versus IUL. You're just gonna walk away pissed off. You're just not gonna win and everything. So I'm waiting for it. I'm waiting for it.
You're gonna walk away educated. What are you talking about?
And see, everyone's gonna walk away pissed off. So
They're gonna draw my team. That's what usually happens.
I know, I know. You start drinking that Kool-Aid, right? You want fruit punch or you want lemon lime. So
We want no Kool-Aid.
no Kool-Aid. Never. Never.
No.
So once again, joking aside, you don't want to have an argument. You're trying to help the client understand. Seek to understand if it does fit in their portfolio. There really is a situation where it's not going to be for everybody, but does everyone truly want 100% market exposure? The answer more often is not. So this one is one that I've always, heard incorporate the feel, felt, found technique. So prospect raises an objection, you kind of build a framework around that. I understand how you feel. Many clients that I've talked to feel the same way. Before we walk through the numbers, what they found was that having a portion of their retirement guaranteed income gave them, kind of that peace of mind. So you acknowledge that they have a concern. Other people have felt the same way, but after you guys have had an educated conversation, they have come to the agreement that they do need it. So feel, felt, found is a very old technique, but well seasoned, for the conversation purposes. Always return to their objectives. So remember what your objectives are, Mr. and Mrs. Client. We want to make sure that those do not get out of the way. So you mentioned you're worried about outliving your money. Does the guaranteed income approach address that concern? That's a very valid question. Earlier, you said your biggest fear is another 2008 style crash. Does this principal protection help you sleep better at night? You told me your goal is 5,000 a month isn't guaranteed income. Does this strategy get you there? All of these, as you can see, and everything that we're doing here are questions. Because when you go back to the first statement that we talked about, no one wants to win an argument. You want to educate. Well, you need that audience participation from their side to see if they're still with you. Scamming agents do get pissed off. Only ones I see get mad. That is true. That is very true. And Michael, you raised a good point. So, there was the old career group that I used to wholesale to. They used to have a persistency bonus that is based off submits. Wasn't even based off place business, it was based off submits. And the phrase was, you don't want this person in your house Thursday night if they've made no sales all week. It's because they want to stay in their persistency. So, once again, going back to being on the independent side, we have that better foundation for education because we don't get locked into certain scammy things. I'll put it that way. Um, but yeah, I mean, the big thing is that you're consistently asking questions to grow the baseline for the customer to become more aware. And then really the big thing is know when to walk away. If a prospect is fixated on maximum returns, unwilling to listen to your side of the coin, you should be comfortable saying, based on what you're telling me, it sounds like you're comfortable in market risk. You're looking for maximum growth. Sounds like an FIA doesn't fit into that right now, but we should revisit that maybe in a few years or closer when you get to retirement. So you're re-acknowledging the fact that they like what they like, and you just got to kind of say, okay, this isn't for you, but maybe later on, don't forget my number kind of thing. I literally had that with a client who they had, I think, $300,000. Husband and wife, they were mid 60s, late 60s, and they had 300,000 that they wanted to grow to let's say $1 million to give to their two kids. And I said, okay, well, we can grow this money in a fixed index annuity. And it will be a situation where, when we grow the money, you'll be at the point where, let's say 10 years down the road, your money is doubled. So 300,000 turns into 600,000. That's not quite $1 million, which was their objective. So I said, well, when you think about it, after 10 years, you're in your late 60s, you're now in your late 70s, mortality age 78 to 82. If I showed you for example's sake, if you put this 300,000 into a second and die policy for life insurance, it gave them $1 million policy. But the husband was so adamant that he did not want life insurance, but he wouldn't explain why. And so we sat there for about 30 minutes, just kind of going through some numbers for different annuities, different ideas. None of them really fit the profile. And I would just kind of dance back at, so is there a reason why you don't like life insurance? He's like, it's not going to do what I need it to do. And I was like, well, it's going to give you tax-free death benefit versus 300,000 growing to 600,000 or higher is going to be taxable. This is day one. This is, 10, 20 years down the road. What am I missing here? And they were adamant about not doing life insurance. I said, okay, well, here's the options. Without doing the life insurance, this is what you can get, and would love to help you. But I think you guys should think about it together and just let us know. And ultimately, it went nowhere. But the interesting thing that people always tell you, like with sales, one thing to get a sale is great, but you also have to remember that, the whole point of the sale, you're dating the client all the way up to you getting paid a commission. That really is your marriage gift, because now you're going to be with that client for the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, managing their account, making sure everything is kosher. So you also have to ask yourself, is this the right type of client that you want to continue working with? Because ultimately, if you're trying to fight someone, like we mentioned on the prior screen, and you finally win that sale, you get the commission, you get the client in, let's say even after a year, there's no chargebacks. Well, then the client is, complaining that, what they got is not what they wanted. Then there's surrender charges. Then you have to deal with that headache. I mean, I'm sure we've all been in that same boat in regards to servicing clients. So just as much as you want to make a sale, I think know when to walk away is probably one of the most important things to think about in regards to your whole sales acumen. Because when it comes down to it, your name and your word is your bond. And if you're just gonna take a sale to take a sale, and then ignore these people, that word is gonna go around too to your community. So just kind of remember why you do it, what you're doing it for, and then ultimately, if you have to walk away, you have to walk away from it. So what I would say here is, and I can't encourage this enough, role play, objections, responses in like team meetings, or if you want to set up time with me, like I tell everybody this, I'm gonna put this in the chat. Uh, I don't chase people. I don't have time to chase people. I got a lot of stuff going on, a lot of great stuff coming down the pike for everybody in Valor. But I'm not chasing people. But if you want to role play, you have case design, you have something that you want to do outside of me doing these trainings, appointments.valorfs.com. You'll want to get into that and book time with me, because when you have a big client and you want to go over some type of strategy, some type of solution, some type of opportunity, I have an open calendar. So if you book time, that is your time. I don't care if it's 10-year, $100,000 term or a $10 million policy. If you book time on my calendar, that is yours for me and you to talk. So I am open for anybody for any conversation. Okay, so role play, a big one. What type of clients are you working with? What type of concerns do they have? What can we do to help you get that across the finish line? Customize the examples with real client scenarios that they've encountered. So if you have these, clients that you're going to meet, maybe bring a sample illustration of what things like you're going to offer can do. In regards to annuities, I have a subscription to Annuities Genius. It's normally $250 a month. I can give it to you for 165, and you can run multiple scenarios on annuities with all the carriers, and you can see what works best. It has completely changed how I've approached annuities this year. Our organization has nearly doubled in annuity size just by simply using these type of things to help us enhance the value proposition for the customer. Track which objections you come up with most frequently. That's why I say, like, if you are constantly going back and running into issue after issue after issue, and it's the same one that you can't overcome, let's go back to number one. Let's role play. Let's have conversations. I'll pretend to be that jerk of a client and see how you overcome that conversation with me. Or flip the script, I'll be the one trying to sell you, and you be the jerk client and see how I handle it. Always fun, kind of with that stuff. And then always follow up objection handling with a clear call to action. So, does this address your concern? Are you ready to move forward with an illustration, or are you ready for move forward with an application? Because if you leave it open and like I say nebulous, that leaves room for interpretation or no action, and that's the hardest thing is when there's no action. So, from that standpoint, what I would say, from the people who are on today, for those who came in a little late, we will have this up on the YouTube channel for the objections and everything. Very wordy, and I apologize for that, but better than nothing, right? So I'll open it up right now for any questions that people have. See if anybody has any questions to start. Yeah, Raphael.
Yeah, income riders. Do
Mhm.
do all annuities have income riders or only income annuities?
So
Okay.
I was going to say, accumulation annuities technically have an income rider. It's called annuitization. So you can still annuitize
Oh,
annuities, but a lot of times when you annuitize annuities, you lose control. So you no longer own the asset. And if you die, if you don't have a period certain, then all of a sudden that money is gone. So if you're going to annuitize, most people recommend doing at least a 10-year period certain, because that would at least liquidate all the money that you've put into it before you get to the gains and things like that. So at least someone will get the benefit if you do annuitize and pass away like right away. So Um, so yeah,
and
but
they
technically,
are
go
those
ahead.
riders pretty expensive?
The income riders are usually around 1 to 1.5%. But again, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So when you think about expense, if I could give you guaranteed income for you and say your spouse, I don't know if you're married, but say your spouse too, for the rest of your lives, do you think you'd be okay with a 1% fee that really doesn't count towards any of the income you're going to get for the rest of your lives? Most people will say, okay, well, that makes sense because when you look at the ledgers, when you look at the income that you're going to get at by about year 10, you've already pulled out more than you've put in to the contract, maybe year 15. But at the time of, let's say you do a joint payout, two lives, you're talking probably at least 20 years worth of income. And you'll see that you'll get into house money pretty quick. And you wouldn't have that if you just took regular income to quote unquote save a fee that was on the account. So kind of like what we said, you go back to the objective. What do you really care about the fee for if I can give you guaranteed income, which meets your objective of 5,000 a month or whatever it may be? So it's irrelevant because the value outweighs the cost.
Gotcha. Thanks, Phil.
Yep. So there was a question here on bonus versus non-bonus annuities, pros and cons. So please explain. So bonuses inside annuities a lot of times are meant to help people move money from one annuity to another. A lot of times that's the case, or to sweeten the deal for customers to come in. Um, so what you'll typically find is, so say I have an annuity with Global Atlantic. All right, I'm just gonna pick on Global. And then Global has 3 years left. The policy hasn't performed well. And Phil Resch comes in with a sexy new annuity that's supposed to make you breakfast. And you sit there and you say, well, I can't move over there because I have a surrender charge still left of 8%. Ah, well, this sexy new annuity that'll make you breakfast has a 10% bonus. So that bonus will outweigh your surrender charge. Time to move your money. So that's the perk on having bonuses is if you have a better value proposition with a better annuity, then that can make sense. But once again, going back to beauty is in the eye of the beholder, there are situations where if you have a bonus, it can reduce your pars and caps. A good example is if you look at American Equity, which is a company that I do like, but American Equity, they have their Asset Shield 10, and they have their Asset Shield 10 bonus. And the bonus gives you, I think, 10% bonus on the cash. But if you look at the par rates or the cap rates, let's say the cap for the S&P is like 10, but on the other one with the bonus in it, it's like 8.25. So the question is does that early bonus help you or hurt you long term? And oftentimes when you see some people touting, let's say a 30% bonus plus a 9% roll up, that doesn't mean it's the best. Because if you look at some annuities that have no bonus, but give you a higher payout on the back end, say at 8% versus a 5%, now all of a sudden it doesn't look as sexy as it did, at the start of when you talk about the mechanics of the product versus what it's really going to do for you. And that's why I like Annuity Genius because it basically separates all of the minutia of those, bonuses, non-bonuses, and whatever to give you exactly what you're looking for your customer. So for example's sake, yeah, fake bonuses. So like when you think about it, I'll say it, the Nexus products are highly touted because of the 30% bonus and the roll up. But what's interesting is when you look at the nationwide products in general, they have no doubler if the client becomes chronically ill. So if my income was $19,000 a year with Nationwide and it was 18,500 with American Equity, but American Equity had a bonus doubler if I can't perform 2 out of 6 activities of daily living, you tell me what's better for you, Mr. Client or Mrs. Client, because I'm not about to make that decision. I'll give you the options. And that's once again kind of going back to how we handle objections or just sales in general. If I give you 2 options, I've taken away the harder question of whether or not you're going to buy. I'm giving you the easier question, pick which one you want to buy. Okay. The onus is now on the client because they made that decision. You did not make that decision for them. So there's a lot of things that helps with, regulations and rules like DOL, Department of Labor with their Secure Act and all that stuff. Like there are people trying to sue people from 10 years ago from a decision they made on selling a fund that didn't perform well for a client, and now they're suing them for that. So all of this stuff, that's why I say educate versus, you know, force someone into something, because at the end of the day, you're going to be held liable for that. And paper trails help everything. So I'm all about helping people solve the problems to get to the retirement they deserve and the legacy they want to preserve. But also, too, I want to cover my own keister because, I got kids to feed and I'm also sensitive. I'm not going to go to a prison because someone thinks I did something wrong for sure. I don't want to be, anyway. So, so yeah, I mean, we got to take the blinders off of biases. A lot of people have biases from, only having two or three or four carriers when there's a whole industry out there of great opportunities and options for the customer. We just have to make sure we figure out what's best. See you, Vipul. I'll actually see you tomorrow. Um, so yeah, so great questions. Yeah, and Michael, you lead a good point too. When do they need the money? Accessibility to the money. Obviously, we all know that a 10-year annuity pays us the most comparative to a 7 or a 5. But if the client needs accessibility in 7 years, why would you sell them a 10-year, right? So suitability is very important, especially in this. The money will come. And just really your reputation is what's going to get you more money than just a quick and greasy sale, to say the least. So too many times have I seen people do the wrong thing and then, no one trusts them anymore. That's a big deal. Any other questions? Good stuff. Good stuff. All right. So give you a quick heads up. We've got the YouTube channel. So this will be up on at Valor Financial either later tonight or tomorrow. And also, just to give you guys a heads up, there are some great things coming, as I mentioned. Be on the lookout. Valor is building out their own back office for submission of applications, other stuff too, including like a community page, learning management system. All that stuff is starting to integrate. So you're going to see a lot of changes, good changes, in the near future. So be on the lookout for that. If you didn't see the emails, canceling the Wednesday night back to basics until next year. Reason is next week is Thanksgiving. Then I'm going to be off to Vegas for a meeting, and then Charlotte, and then we're in the holiday season, so we'll still keep up the Thursdays, not next week, but we'll probably keep up the Thursdays until middle of December before we'll call it for the rest of the year. As I mentioned, there's a lot of great stuff coming, so I'm very excited to show it to you guys when it gets here, and I appreciate the patience, the partnership. Hope everyone enjoys their turkey day, and have a great rest of your day, rest of your weekend. So we'll talk soon.
Thanks.
See you guys. Yeah, bye.